Maria Hamilton moved her sons to Milwaukee, Wisconsin from Gary, Indiana, to flee the gang violence that had taken over the city. But that dream of a new beginning and a safer life for her children ended last April 30th.
Right here?
Okay, so he was just lying down right here.
Yes.
That afternoon, Maria's youngest son, Dontre Hamilton, was sleeping in Red Arrow Park downtown when an officer woke and searched him. The two began to argue.
The officer pulled his baton out and started to strike Dontre with the baton. Dontre took his baton, and witnesses are saying that Dontre never struck the officer. He was standing in a defensive manner with the baton. So at that point, the officer must have got frustrated and unloaded his weapon 14 times.
The shooting is under investigation. The district attorney has yet to determine if any charges will be filed against the officer.
The history here shows that a lot of police officers just get a slap on the wrist.
Hamilton was killed just days after Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker signed a new state law, the first in the nation requiring that police shootings be investigated by an outside agency. The new law is the culmination of a 10-year mission by Michael Bell. Bell's 21-year-old son was also shot and killed by police.
Can you tell me about your son?
21-year-old kid, had some flaws, had some promise. In fact, that picture right there is the last picture I ever took on him. He was bandaging his younger brother's knee. They were out playing basketball together, and the younger brother was crying, and I go, hey, nice picture. And I brought up my camera, and I snapped it, and that was the last photo I ever took of him.
Get back in the car. Get back in the car.
On the night of November 7th, 2004, Michael Bell Jr. was stopped by Kenosha police in front of his mother and sister's house while driving a friend's vehicle. Captured on the police car's dashboard camera, the situation escalated.
Some of the witnesses said that they saw Michael at that point was running with his hands behind his back like this towards the back of the house.
In later statements, Officer Eric Strausbaugh said Bell continued to violently resist arrest in spite of being tased multiple times. Michael Bell Sr. showed me what he says happened next.
Michael was bent over the car this way with his hands behind his back, and an officer holding Michael in a bear hug. This officer at some point started screaming, "He's got my gun, he's got my gun."
Strausbaugh later stated that, in my mind, my KPD-issued gun was being taken away from me by Michael Bell. This police reenactment shows their version of events. But an independent investigation raised another possibility, one supported by witnesses and later forensic tests.
One of the theories that you had is you think that the officer might have actually gotten his gun hooked on this broken mirror here?
Strausbaugh screaming, "He has my gun." All he knew that something was tugging on his gun. And that's when Gonzalez decided to take his life.
DNA testing found no evidence that Bell touched Strausbaugh's holster or revolver, and Bell's mother, an eyewitness to the shooting, insists her son never reached for the officer's gun.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good, I'm Christoph. Nice to meet you.
Now divorced from Michael Bell, Kim Bell has never shown the media what she saw that night until today.
Mike's hands, you could see him with the lighting and everything, and he's got his jacket on, and the cop put his gun on my son's head, and we're screaming for help, and it didn't go off right away, and then the gun went off, and I saw my son fall to the ground. I fell to the ground.
I know.
Bell Sr., who didn't witness the shooting, initially withheld judgment. As a retired military pilot, familiar with investigative procedure, he expected an in-depth accident investigation would sort out the facts.
How did it actually go down?
It was a sham. Within 48 hours, I get a call from the reporter at the local newspaper, and he said the police have held a review panel and they've cleared themselves of any wrongdoing. The shooting is justified.
2 days they had cleared this officer.
The crime lab report wasn't back. The autopsy wasn't complete. None of these things had even come back, and they had cleared themselves of all wrongdoing.
I mean, I guess I could keep talking.
He began researching how police shootings were investigated in Wisconsin and was disturbed by what he found.
I didn't understand at the time that the police actually investigated themselves, they collect the data, and then they give that to the DA, and he makes a decision based on the data that he's given. In 129 years, since 1885, we could not find a police department, an inquest jury, or a fire commission that said that any shooting was unjustified.
He vowed then to fight for a simple change.
If a police officer takes a life, let's make sure that the department that was involved in that shooting doesn't investigate itself.
He began to gather together a team who had all experienced violence at the hands of Wisconsin police. They sought comfort in common tragedy and huddled together to plot reform.
This beast of a problem.
There was Amelia Royko, whose unarmed roommate, Paul Heenan, was gunned down by a policeman who mistook him for a burglar. There was Deborah Jenkins, whose son Larry, also unarmed, was shot by a Milwaukee police officer.
Larry's hands was up. Remind me of Ferguson.
And there was Sonia Moore, whose son Derek Williams suffocated in the back of a police cruiser, pleading with his last breath for help. In all cases, the officers were absolved of responsibility.
I'm still looking for justice that I didn't get, and I'm glad everybody's still fighting because I don't know how to fight if I didn't have everyone in this room. I don't have a lot of fight because I don't know how without people.
The group honed their message to a fine point. When police kill, should they judge themselves? Bell spent over $100,000 on a billboard campaign, at one point leasing every single one in the Milwaukee area.
And at that time, there were 12.5 million people driving by these billboards in Milwaukee each week. It was every place you saw. I am not anti-cop, okay?
But without support from Wisconsin's powerful police unions, there was little chance the reform would ever become law. So Bell reached out.
I contacted the director of the state's largest police association. His name is James Palmer. And at first, James Paul just lambasted me. How dare you talk to me? You think you're going to have a conversation with me with those billboards and those ads running and so forth?
And I said that as long as those billboards were running, that I couldn't, in good conscience, I couldn't begin that dialogue.
He essentially said, if you take down your billboards, I will help you craft a bill that you suggest, and let's see if we can run it through the legislature.
To Michael Bell's credit, he took the billboards down, and we began a dialogue that really continues to this day.
With union backing, the bill was signed by the governor on April 23rd of this year.
Our whole team was there. Mothers of other boys that had been killed by police officers were standing right behind the governor as he's signing the bill.
How did you feel when the law was finally passed?
It just felt like I accomplished my mission.
You think you'd be happy?
Yeah. South Carolina, Texas, North Carolina.
Bell and his team are now setting their sights on other states.
Finally, they're going to hey, the 49 states right now have this. Why doesn't our state have this? And eventually it'll change over.
Let's go to the meet.
But even in Wisconsin, the struggle is far from over.
Public meeting. Public meeting. Public meeting.
Recently, family and friends of Dontre Hamilton gathered to protest the slow pace of the investigation into his death. Hamilton's attorney has accused the Milwaukee Police Department of ignoring the new law.
No compromise.
Now, Hamilton's mother is starting down the long road Michael Bell walked before her.
Dontre's name, his voice to be heard as long as I have breath. We're going to dedicate our lives to a change in our community. I'm not leaving anywhere.